Do you feel safer now? Or do old wounds still echo sometimes?
They sent Trevor to Bali and left me with a $10 Olive Garden gift card. That's not a metaphor or a punchline or some kind of poetic exaggeration. That's just what happened. No cake, no balloons, not even a phone call before noon. Just a single card with a fork and spaghetti printed on it, signed "Love you, kiddo, Mom" in her rushed, half-cursive handwriting. She probably scribbled it in the car right before they boarded the plane. The card had that stiff, waxy kind of feel, like it had been plucked from the half-off bin near the pharmacy counter at Rite Aid. And taped inside, crookedly, by the way, was a $10 Olive Garden gift card, the kind you usually give your coworker when you barely know their last name. That was it. That was my birthday. I remember sitting on the couch in my apartment, holding that damn card, staring at it like it might change if I blinked long enough. Maybe it would unfold into some sort of joke, like one of those singing cards that opens and belts out "Happy Birthday" off-key. Or maybe there was a second card coming, the real one. Maybe this was a decoy, a warm-up act. But no, that was the only thing that came in the mail that day. And just when I thought it couldn't get more absurd, Mom called that evening from the resort, her voice fuzzy over the international line, all cheerful and casual like she was just calling from the next town over. I could hear waves in the background, and what sounded like glasses clinking, probably champagne. She laughed and told me about the sunrise yoga session they'd done that morning, how Trevor tried to flirt with the instructor and pulled a muscle instead. I listened, polite and quiet, and then she dropped it, the sentence that snapped something in me so cleanly. "I swear I felt it in my jaw. Don't take it personally, Jess. It was just his turn this year." His turn. She said it like we were trading off shifts at a factory or taking turns driving cross-country. Like birthdays were something you got in rotation, 1 year for me, 1 year for him, and the fairness gods had decided it was Trevor's year to matter. I didn't say a word, not a single syllable. I let her keep talking, let her ramble about the shrimp buffet and the sea turtles they saw snorkeling, and how much Trevor really needed this break after everything he's been through. She didn't ask what I'd done that day, or if I had anyone over, or how I was feeling. She just ended the call with, "Love you, sweetheart. We'll do something when we're back." And then she was gone. Just like that. I sat there a long time after that. Long enough that the light from outside faded into that deep, purplish hue that settles in just before full dark. I didn't cry, not even a little. That's the funny thing about years of disappointment. Eventually, the shock wears off, and you stop feeling hurt and start feeling numb. And in that numbness, I started to write. Not a diary entry. Not a poem. A letter. To them. Or maybe about them. I wasn't sure yet. All I knew was that something inside me had shifted, like a gear grinding into place after years of slipping teeth. I wasn't going to yell or argue or beg to be seen. I was done with that. This time, I was going to do something quieter. Something they'd actually notice. And by the time they did, it would already be too late. The truth is, this wasn't just about Bali. This wasn't about a damn gift card. This was about 38 years of being the good one, the reliable one, the one who never made a scene. Trevor got to stumble through life like a blindfolded drunk, and they clapped every time he managed to stand up. I built a life out of nothing, paid my way through college, held 2 jobs, never asked for a cent, and all I got was a nod and the expectation that I'd keep doing it without complaint. And for the longest time I did. Because I believed it meant something. I believed they'd see it, eventually. That someday Mom would sit me down and say, "Jess, I know you've carried a lot." But that day never came. And somewhere between the gift card and the yoga story, I realized it never would. That night, I opened my laptop, lit a single candle in the corner. I always write better in dim light, and I typed the first words of what would become the most honest thing I've ever written. This is not a goodbye letter. It's a mirror. Read carefully, you might not like what you see. They thought they knew me. They thought they'd figured out the rhythm of me, predictable, forgiving, soft. But they forgot one thing. I notice everything. Every sigh, every shrugged-off accomplishment, every conversation where Trevor's name came up 5 times more than mine. I've been collecting moments for decades, quietly cataloging the slights they didn't even realize they delivered. Not out of spite. just out of self-preservation. Because when you're the forgotten child, you learn to remember everything, just in case you ever get a chance to finally be heard. And now, I was done waiting for that chance to come on its own. I was going to create it. Not with rage. Not with tears. But with something far more uncomfortable, the truth. Laid out in plain black text. Folded. Sealed. Taped to the inside of my apartment door, where they'd have to see it when they came by, wondering why I wasn't returning their calls, why Thanksgiving invitations went unanswered. Why the good one had finally gone quiet. They thought silence meant acceptance. They were about to find out what it really meant. And I promise you this, the letter didn't start the fire. It just showed them where the matches had always been. There's something almost surgical about how families can wound you without ever raising their voices, without ever lifting a hand or leaving a mark that anyone else could see. They don't need cruelty to be cruel, not when they have subtlety and years of layered expectations to hide behind. And my family, my mother especially, had made an art of it. Over time, it stopped looking like pain and started looking like order, like balance. Like this fake idea of fairness she'd clung to ever since we were kids, the kind of fairness that looks fair on paper, but only if you never look at who's holding the pen. Trevor was always the one who needed more time, more space, more attention, more chances. And, because I was older by 4 years and apparently born with the sainted ability to understand things better, I was expected to need less. When Trevor lost his favorite toy truck, it was a family search party. When I lost my first diary, the one with the tiny gold lock and the heart sticker on the cover, I was told to be more careful next time. When he got a B in math, my mom baked him brownies and told him she was proud of the effort. When I got straight A's, she glanced at the report card and said, "Well, that's what we expect from you, isn't it?" That kind of thing burrows into your ribs when you're little, nests in your chest where other people store warm memories and starts to calcify. And after Dad died, everything tilted even harder in his favor, like someone had quietly turned the world on its side and nobody bothered to level it again. My father, for all his faults, saw me. Not in the cheesy, movie script kind of way where he called me his little princess or painted my room with fairies. He saw me in small, unshakable ways, the way he asked what I was reading without trying to correct me, or the way he made me my own cup of coffee, just milk and sugar, because he said grown-ups deserve to sit at the table too, even when they were only 13. He didn't say much, but when he did, it always landed. When he passed, heart attack, quick and sudden, like a light being switched off, I watched my mother take all the emotional real estate he once occupied and hand the keys to Trevor, who was barely old enough to know how to carry it. I don't blame her, not entirely. She was grieving, and Trevor, with his clumsy charm and boyish helplessness, was easy to love loudly. He cried in public. I cried in bathrooms. He asked for help. I disappeared into schoolwork and books and the cold comfort of quiet efficiency. Over time, she didn't even have to ask me to step aside, I just did. I canceled plans when Trevor had panic attacks. I lent him money that never returned. I took the back seat in my own life, convinced that one day, when things evened out, she'd look up and finally see me again. But the problem with stepping aside for someone for too long is that eventually, people forget you were ever standing there. As adults, things only got more imbalanced. Trevor bounced between half-finished degrees and startup job scams while I taught high school, paid rent on time, called every Sunday, and sent birthday cards, real ones, not pre-written junk with a signature slapped on. He'd go missing for weeks, sometimes months, and when he showed up again with a new excuse and a new debt, Mom would throw her arms around him like he'd returned from war, like the world had mistreated her baby and she needed to make it right. Once, he borrowed almost $2,000 from her to invest in some crypto project, and when I raised an eyebrow, she just said, "He's trying, Jess. You don't understand what it's like to struggle." And that right there, that line stuck in me like a fish hook in the skin. Because I do know struggle. I just never performed it for applause. The funny thing is, I might have kept swallowing all of it, the one-sided support, the his turn vacations, the blind forgiveness, if not for the sheer, audacious insult of that birthday call. There was something about the breezy cruelty of it that sharpened everything else. I remember hanging up and looking around my apartment, which wasn't luxurious, but was mine. Every lamp, every throw pillow, every framed print on the wall had been chosen and earned and paid for by me alone. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel proud. I felt tired. Bone deep, spine hollow tired. And somewhere inside that fatigue, a strange, unfamiliar clarity bloomed. I started writing the letter that night. Not all at once. Just a paragraph. Then another. Then a story. Then a memory. I didn't plan it. It just came. Like pressure leaving a sealed jar. I didn't even know who the letter was for at first. Part of me wanted to send it to Mom. Part of me wanted to frame it and hang it above my bed like a monument. But the more I wrote, the more I realized it wasn't about who read it, it was about me, finally putting into words the things I'd carried in silence. And with each page, I stopped feeling guilty and started feeling awake. The words I wrote weren't angry, not exactly. They weren't bitter or cruel or dramatic. They were calm, measured, clinical almost. And that's what would make them hurt more, because when you stop crying and start observing, that's when people start to panic. That's when they realize the person they've been neglecting all these years didn't just drift away, she walked. Deliberately, quietly, and with a purpose. And that's why the last line I wrote before I finally went to bed was this: if you're reading this, I've already started the process. I didn't say what the process was. I didn't explain or clarify. But I promise you, it wasn't revenge. It was liberation. And it had been a long time coming. I didn't tape the letter to my door because I wanted it to be dramatic, or because I had some secret fantasy of them finding it like characters in a movie stumbling on a suicide note in the final act. It wasn't like that. The letter wasn't a cry for help, and it sure as hell wasn't an invitation for discussion or apology. I taped it there for one simple reason. I wanted them to see it the way I've seen them all my life, suddenly, directly, and with no ability to turn away or pretend they didn't know what they were looking at. I didn't want it tucked in an envelope, delivered quietly by mail, or lost in a pile of birthday cards and bank statements. I wanted it front and center, waiting on the very threshold they'd have to cross if they ever decided to finally show up for me, not metaphorically, not with excuses or intentions, but physically. In real time. I didn't leave a key. I didn't leave a note saying, "I'm out, be back soon." I left only the letter. A full 3 pages, printed cleanly, single-spaced, and folded with care, taped not to the outside of the door like a message to a mailman, but inside, just beyond the peephole, where I knew they'd see it when they peered in to see if the lights were on. If maybe I was just ignoring their calls again or sleeping through the weekend like some dramatic teenager punishing her parents for not remembering prom. Except I'm not 17. I'm 38. And if I'm punishing anyone, it's not with silence, it's with the truth they never had the patience or interest to sit through. The letter didn't start with accusations, because I knew the moment they felt attacked, they'd stop reading. I didn't call Mom out for her favoritism or Trevor for his endless ability to turn screw-ups into sympathy. I didn't even mention Bali until the 3rd paragraph, and even then, I talked about it like a symptom, not a cause, because the cause went deeper than geography or airline miles. The cause was history. Decades of it. I began with a memory. The day I broke my wrist falling off the neighbor's swing set when I was 8, and while we waited in the emergency room, my mom spent the entire time telling me how much trouble she was going to be in for missing Trevor's piano recital. I wrote, "You didn't mean to make me feel guilty, I know that, but you did." And it wasn't the last time. From there, the memories rolled out like a quiet tide, not crashing or shouting, but steady and undeniable. I didn't insult them. I didn't dramatize. I didn't even raise my voice on the page. I simply reminded them of the many, many times I had stepped aside so Trevor could be seen. I listed birthdays where he got trips and I got promises. I listed phone calls where I sat in silence while Mom raved about Trevor's new apartment, or Trevor's new girlfriend, or Trevor's new idea for a podcast, while I, a fully functioning adult with a career and a mortgage, was reduced to "she's doing good." Always has been. I detailed how many times I was told I was so strong in the same tone someone might use to say so quiet or so easy, like my greatest contribution was taking up the least space. And somewhere near the end, I wrote what I still believe is the clearest thing I've ever said in my life. I'm not mad. I'm just finished. There's a difference between rage and resolve. Rage burns hot and fast and leaves you screaming into the wind. Resolve is cold. It's surgical. It doesn't make a scene. It makes decisions. And that letter wasn't a fire. It was a map. A guide for them to retrace their steps and maybe, if they were honest, recognize the places where they had taken wrong turns without even noticing. And I knew, even as I typed it, that they wouldn't like what they found at the end of that road. Because no one wants to realize they've loved unequally. No one wants to be told they've built a home with a room that someone they claim to love never felt safe in. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not my friends, not my colleagues, not even the neighbor who sometimes fed my cat when I had late staff meetings. I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want input. I just wanted to live 1 week in my life without answering for other people's choices. And for a few days, the silence was eerie. No calls. No texts. No passive-aggressive voicemails. Just space. Which, ironically, is all I ever wanted from them, the kind of space where I could finally exist as someone other than the emotional support system for a man-child brother and a selectively blind mother. Then, on the third day, I got a message from my Aunt Linda. Just a short one. Hey, Jess. I heard you wrote something. What's going on? Are you okay? That was the moment I realized someone had read it, or at least heard about it. Because Linda didn't talk to me unless she was nudged to. Which meant Mom had seen the letter. Probably read it. Probably gasped and clutched her pearls and said something like, I just don't understand where this is coming from, like the pain of her own daughter had arrived from a stranger's life. And that was the moment I smiled. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because I finally knew she couldn't ignore me anymore. I knew that she, for once, had been forced to face the version of me she'd chosen to sideline for most of her life, the version that didn't ask for scraps and didn't say, it's fine, every time it wasn't. I didn't need her to fall to pieces. I didn't even need her to call. I just needed her to know. But the most satisfying moment came later, when I printed another copy of the letter, this time edited for public viewing, names changed, specifics blurred, but the bones left intact, and I posted it online. Just one sentence captioning it, this is what it looks like when silence finally speaks. Within hours, the comments started. Strangers. Coworkers. Old friends. Even former students. Saying things like, I feel this in my bones, or I didn't know how to say it until now, or simply, damn. It spread faster than I expected, not viral, but enough. Enough for the circle to widen. Enough for the story to no longer be something that lived in my lungs alone. And then came the message that stopped me cold. It was from Trevor. Short. Clumsy. Hesitant. Jess. Mom says you're mad. I don't know what I did. I didn't reply. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I'd already said everything. And the thing about letters is, once they're read, they can't be unread. Now it was their turn to sit in silence. It's a strange thing, watching people unravel not because you shouted or exploded or burned bridges, but because you simply removed yourself from the equation, like gently pulling a single brick from the bottom of a house they thought was indestructible, only to watch the whole thing begin to shift and creak and lean, as if your quiet presence had been the only thing holding the entire structure upright all along, not by force, but by constant, invisible effort. That's exactly what happened after the letter. Not immediately, of course. At first, there was silence, the kind that buzzes in your ears late at night when you're waiting for a reply you know probably won't come, but then, slowly, that silence began to break apart. Like thawing ice cracking under the weight of footsteps it was never meant to carry. It started with the texts, cautious and brittle, mostly from my mother, all phrased as questions pretending to be concerned, but really designed to probe the edges of what she clearly saw as some sudden emotional outburst. The first text arrived at 6:43 a.m. on a Wednesday. Hi, sweetheart. We read your letter. Do you want to talk? That was it. No apology. No reflection. Just a flimsy offer to talk, as if I'd left a voicemail saying I was upset that the dinner reservation was canceled, rather than having laid out 3 decades of quiet, compound neglect on crisp white paper with no room for misinterpretation. I didn't reply. And then came another message, this one slightly more urgent. Trevor's upset. He didn't understand why you're so angry. Can we meet for lunch and clear the air? I remember staring at my phone, not even feeling rage or pain, just a kind of dull ache in my jaw from clenching my teeth so hard. I hadn't used the word angry once in that letter, but there she was, shrinking everything I'd said down to a single, manageable emotion they could pretend to soothe. As if I were some storm to be waited out. As if this was all going to pass in a few days, and we'd be back to holiday photos and birthday texts with confetti emojis. I didn't respond to that one either, and I guess that's when it started to spread beyond my mother, beyond Trevor, into the outer edges of the family where whispers are currency and silence is suspicious. The calls started trickling in from people I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins, old neighbors, my father's sister who lived 2 states away and only ever reached out for Christmas cards or funeral invitations. One voicemail stood out more than the others, my Aunt Denise, voice low and breathless like she was afraid someone might overhear her. Jess, I don't know what you said to your mom, but it's got her pacing around the house like a ghost. She said something about being blindsided. Honestly, it might have needed to happen. I don't know. Call me. But I didn't. I had nothing left to explain. I started walking more after that, long, deliberate walks with no destination, just movement. Something about the steady rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement helped me resist the urge to reply, to defend, to clarify. Because deep down, I knew what would happen if I gave them even an inch of response. They'd take that inch and twist it into an opportunity to reframe the narrative. They'd say, "We didn't realize you felt that way," or "Why didn't you say something sooner?" And I'd end up spending hours untying the knots in their guilt while mine got retied in tighter, sharper shapes. So instead, I walked. Past the high school where I taught. Past the grocery store with the display of sad, helium-deflating balloons. Past the coffee shop where I used to sit with my mother every other Saturday before Trevor's latest life mess became her full-time hobby. And then, as if summoned by thought alone, he showed up. It was a Sunday morning. I was back from my walk, sweat drying on my neck, coffee cup still in hand, when I heard the knock, not the kind of knock that comes from a delivery driver or a neighbor asking to borrow sugar, but the kind of knock you recognize in your bones before you even get to the peephole. I didn't open the door. I stood there a foot away, listening to the shuffling of feet, the exhale of someone rehearsing what they're going to say. And then, just like I knew he would, he spoke, his voice small, softer than I'd heard it in years, like it had lost all its usual swagger. "Jess. It's me. Can you just open the door? Please." A pause. I read it. "I didn't know you felt like that. I didn't mean for it to be like that. I swear." I still didn't open it. I watched the shadows on the floor shift under the crack in the door and pictured his face, that same boyish, helpless look he'd always used when things got too real, the same tone he'd used on teachers, girlfriends, bosses, cops. Like he was always on the edge of figuring it out, and everyone just needed to be patient with him a little longer. I heard his hand touch the doorknob, then let go. He knocked again. Softer this time. "Please, Jess. Just talk to me. We're family. This isn't you." But that was the thing, it was me. He just didn't recognize this version. Because this version wasn't trying to be the peacemaker or the silent witness anymore. This version had drawn a line in the sand and backed it with brick and mortar. After a few more minutes, he left. I heard his footsteps retreat, slow and reluctant, and then I heard the click of his car door and the engine hum fading into the distance. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, heart beating steady but hard, like something new had started inside me and was refusing to settle back down. I wasn't proud. I wasn't relieved. I was just done. That night, I posted a revised version of the letter on Facebook. Stripped of names, yes, but nothing else was changed. I let it sit for a moment before clicking post, and within minutes, the first few likes trickled in. Then comments. Some long, some just a single word, same, oof, yes. And suddenly, the silence I had been swimming in all these years didn't feel like a personal failure anymore. It felt like a symptom of something wider, something unspoken in so many families that looked put together from the outside, but left scars in all the places polite conversation never reached. I didn't check my messages again that night, but I saw the missed call come through around midnight. It was from Mom. The voicemail was short. "If this is about your father, we should talk." That sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because she mentioned him, but because it was the first time in years she had. And I couldn't help but wonder, what exactly did she think this was really about? But I didn't call back. Not yet. Because I had one more thing left to do. And after that, if they still wanted to talk, they'd have to read the final page. There's something unsettling about the way people suddenly become interested in your pain when it threatens their comfort, like suffering has to be neatly packaged, labeled, and delivered with a warning before it earns acknowledgement, and once it arrives. If it arrives without theatrics, without the loud, familiar signs of breakdown, they act surprised, even offended, that it's real. That was the flavor of silence I felt after Mom's voicemail, that clipped and careful sentence that carried the weight of something far older than the letter I wrote, something buried in the cracks of our family's foundation. Something she probably hoped I'd forgotten, but which had sat quietly in my memory, accumulating dust and weight like an unopened box shoved into the back of a closet. "If this is about your father, we should talk." 7 words, and every single one rang with the kind of selective memory that made me realize she hadn't read the letter to understand. She'd read it to find something she could blame. But I didn't respond. Not because I was being cruel or petty or vengeful, but because I knew, without a shred of doubt, that if I opened that door now, if I answered that call or sat across from her at some overpriced coffee shop sipping lattes while pretending we were just working through things, I would be dragged right back into the role I had just finally escaped. And the thing about escaping a role you've played your entire life is that once you step off the stage and see the script for what it was, manipulative, limiting, unworthy, you can't go back, even if the audience still expects the performance. So instead of calling her, I finished the final draft of the letter, the one version I hadn't shared with anyone, not the carefully worded edit for Facebook or the version I'd taped behind my door, but the raw, unfiltered letter that had been sitting in a folder on my desktop titled Last Copy, which I had left untouched for over a week because something in me knew it needed to be read one more time, not by them, but by me. And so I printed it, not to mail it or frame it or publish it, but to sit with it, face it, and finally understand exactly what I had written and why it mattered more than any apology ever could. The letter began as all the others had, not with accusations, but with context, the slow, deliberate kind of storytelling that forces the reader to stay with it, to walk each step without skipping ahead, because that's how the pain had arrived in my life. Quietly, incrementally, and without anyone asking whether I could carry it. I wrote about the nights I stayed up past midnight studying because Trevor needed help managing his anxiety, and Mom didn't want the house to be too loud for him. I wrote about the vacations that were always too expensive until Trevor suggested them, the family photos where I stood on the edge, half-cropped, half-present, the thank yous that always came with a side of obligation, like being helpful was just part of the deal for being the strong one. I wrote about my father, about the way he used to sit on the porch with me and listen, really listen, like he wasn't waiting to talk or fix or explain, but just wanted to be there in the quiet, and how. After he died, the only place I found that kind of stillness was in books and later, in silence, the kind that made people uncomfortable because it couldn't be explained away with a joke or a distraction. And near the end of the letter, after 3 full pages of memory and hurt and precise, intentional honesty, I included the one line that had echoed in my head from the very first day I started writing it. A line I hadn't been brave enough to say aloud until now. "The silence you gave me for decades, I'm giving it back now, not out of hate, but because silence, when finally understood, is louder than any scream." I signed it with just my name. No love. No closing. No bow. A week after that, I moved. Not across the country, not into hiding, but into a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, where the houses have peeling paint and strange little garden statues, and the people wave without expecting a conversation. I didn't make a big announcement, didn't leave a forwarding address, just handed the keys to my old apartment to the next tenant and took one last look at the door where the first letter had hung. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty in a necessary way, like cleaning out a room that's been cluttered for so long you forgot what it looked like with light coming through the windows. My new place isn't big. It doesn't have a guest room, and I'm not planning to make space for one. But it does have a reading nook, a gas fireplace that crackles even in July when I'm in the mood, and a kitchen just big enough for one person to cook without bumping into memories. I planted a small ivy in a ceramic pot on the windowsill, something green to take root, something new. 3 days after the move, I received a package. No note, no return address. Just a flat, rectangular envelope with stiff edges and a familiar, rushed scrawl on the corner of the label that said, Jess. Inside was a gift card. Olive Garden again. This time $20. As if doubling the insult turned it into an apology. As if they thought I'd look at it and laugh and say, well, they're trying. And I did laugh, but not for the reason they probably hoped. I laughed because it confirmed everything the letter had already said. They still didn't understand. Still believed the hurt could be reset with a slightly better version of the same dismissal. I fed the card into the fireplace, watched it curl and blacken, the edges flaring bright before collapsing into themselves. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like an ending. A punctuation mark after a sentence I'd been afraid to finish. I don't know if they'll ever fully read the letter, not just the words, but the meaning behind them. I don't know if Trevor will ever stop seeing me as the sister who is always fine, or if Mom will ever realize that fairness isn't about giving the loudest person the most space. And, honestly, I'm not waiting to find out. Because the letter was never really for them. It was for me. And I read it again, quietly, alone, on the morning of my 39th birthday. Then I folded it, placed it in a box with my name on it, and slipped it into the top drawer of my desk, not to hide it, but to remind myself of what I already know. That some doors, once closed, should never be reopened. And some silences, once chosen, become the truest kind of freedom.